All right. So, welcome back to part two of this mini training that I'm doing on managing anxious and avoidant relationship behaviors. So, you may have already seen the first one that I did that was on the top three anxious behaviors. If you haven't, then just send me a note or DM me or whatever it is, however you normally contact me, and let me know, and I can send that directly to you. Alternatively, you can just jump onto my YouTube channel, of course, which is where you're seeing this, and you can also have a look at that because it's really, really cool and I've gotten great feedback on it so far. So today is talking about the top three avoidant behaviors in relationships to help you bring awareness to them and to also help you to manage through some of those behaviors so that you can have a more connected relationship, which is what people are really looking for. And what I want you to understand and the frame that I want you to take into thinking about avoidant behaviors is this. If you're in a relationship with somebody who has avoidant tendencies, you can feel very frustrated with them and their behaviors, and you can feel like all they're trying to do is to get away from you and create distance. Now, what I want you to do is to put on a lens of compassion when you think about your avoidant partner in particular. Because what I want you to understand about avoidance up front is that if you're an anxious person or a secure person, you're generally looking for more closeness. It appears that the avoidant is not. However, what sits underneath that avoidant tendency to try to flee and create distance and be very autonomous is the fact that they also want closeness. They just fear it more than you do because of some of their experiences in the past, and particularly their experiences in childhood when they started to develop these avoidant traits in the first place. So I really want you to just look at this through that lens of compassion of, if I'm the person who's in a relationship with an avoidant person, how can I help them to feel more comfortable, to be more vulnerable and open up more and create more closeness without them needing to flee all the time? And how can I support them through that? And then, of course, if you're the avoidant person, this is going to give you some tools on some things that you can do directly and with your own thoughts and feelings and behavior to try to move through that to create more closeness with your partner. Because again, underneath all of the pain is actually what you're looking for, which is connection, deeper relationships, more loving, more intimacy, and a better life and a happier life. So let's jump into it. So this is the top three. And if you remember, this was the last one of the anxious. So when we start looking at the avoidant behaviors, now one of the top behaviors that'll happen, or one of the top patterns that happen, is pulling away when things get intimate. And this is typically not physical intimacy like sex. This is more about emotional intimacy and talking deeper about your shared goals and your shared future and how you're feeling about things and trying to manage and navigate some of those deeper, more emotionally intimate conversations that you may have. So when the avoidant person starts to pull away when this is going on, what they're really doing is they're trying to stay inside of their comfort zone because avoidance is where they feel safer. They're trying to look for more safety. They're trying to control the amount of depth and the amount of vulnerability that they give away in their relationships because remember, they've been taught that vulnerability equals pain. And they're trying to hold on to some of their autonomy and kind of stay a little bit nonchalant or away from the relationship or away from you in a sense that they don't want to give away too much of themselves and become one with you because again, that has caused them pain in the past, even though that's what they actually want underneath all of that. Now, when that happens, what this really creates in the relationship is disconnection. It can strongly trigger the anxiety of the other person or the feelings of the other person that they're not wanted or that there's something wrong or that they're at fault. But it can also create a little bit of sympathy. So the other person can kind of go into that people-pleasing mode, which is one of the things that an anxious person will typically do in that situation. Now, a really big thing that you can do if you're the avoidant person in the relationship and you start to feel yourself getting a little bit out of control or being drawn into that vulnerability or intimacy that you're a little bit afraid of, is you can ask for some space or some time out. So rather than just repeat completely or downplay this or push it away, you can say, hey, I can see we're getting into something really deep and I feel a bit uncomfortable with this. Is it okay if we just take a bit of a break and let me process this and then we can jump back in and take it really slowly? Now, a really important thing that you can do right here in this section is to also commit to the time that you're going to come back and talk about it. So if your partner comes to you and they want to go through something that's a little bit deeper, you're not quite ready for it, and you do ask for space or time out, what you can't do is say, can we talk about this later? And then kind of hope that it goes away and that you really don't have to face it at all. Because what that will do is, again, that will spike the feelings of the other person and lead to frustration and conflict. What you need to do is commit to a time. Can we talk about this after dinner? Can we talk about this when I get home from work? Can we talk about this tomorrow? And commit to that and then stick to that so that you can then have that conversation and both of you can be seen and heard and try to work through and bridge those gaps that you're trying to create with your tendency to retreat. And of course, the ARC method that we talked about in the other video, this is a really powerful one. So this is to acknowledge that you're doing this behavior, to regulate your emotions and take some time out to be with your emotions and regulate your nervous system and come back to a calm state. And then, of course, communicate with your partner exactly what you're feeling and what you need and what will work for you to start to, reconnect and to work through some of these avoidant traits that you've got. So that's the first one. I'm just going to flip over the page. All right, that still looks good. Sometimes the camera focuses a little bit in and out. That looks good. So the second trait that comes up the most, or behavior that comes up the most, is to downplay feelings or needs. And that can be in both directions. That can be their own feelings and needs, and it can also be your feelings and needs if you're in a relationship with them. So we have a tendency to do this because, again, we want to try to avoid the depth and we want to try to avoid the intimacy that comes with talking about how we really feel. Like, oh, that's not such a big deal. When in reality, perhaps it was a really big deal, or nah, it's okay, I'm not upset, or that doesn't bother me, those sorts of things, when really they're just holding that inside because it does bother them. Now, what they're trying to do is they're trying to avoid being a burden to people. Avoidant people can often feel like their emotions and their thoughts and their moods can be a burden to other people, and they don't want to push that onto them. They're trying to avoid vulnerability because vulnerability is where deeper connection comes from, and vulnerability can lead to pain for people. They're trying to avoid conflict and they're trying to avoid rejection. So if you start to go into this is how I feel, there's perhaps an opportunity that their partner can not show up for them and not be there for them or not support them. And therefore, it reinforces that underlying feeling they've got, which is when I'm vulnerable, I'm open to pain. Now, what this really leads to is a lack of intimacy, of course. It leads to a superficial level of connection in your relationship and intimacy and an overall superficial level of engagement, I guess you would say, is the right way to do it. The depth of the relationship never quite gets there. And of course, disconnection from your partner. Now, what you can do if you're the avoidant person here is rather than downplaying feelings or needs, it's a bit of a jump to go straight into vulnerability if you're in this state. So the first thing that I would say before we get to there is to take really small steps towards starting to open up and practice vulnerability with your partner. And of course, let them know that that's what you need to do in order to get there. And your partner will be supportive of this if it's a relationship where you're both wanting to improve it. So take really small steps. And one of the small steps that you can take is to start to write things down for your partner if it feels overwhelming or too big just to come out and say it. So you can either start with really small verbal or really small conversations and then take some time out, then come back to it and build on it and take some time out and come back and keep on regulating, communicating and acknowledging in between. Or you can start by writing this stuff down, whether that's a text message for you, whether it's writing it down for your partner, because I think of that feeling of sometimes when I want to bring up something that I think is going to be emotional or I'm going to be vulnerable, there's certainly times where I can start to feel a little bit emotional before it even happens, right? And we've all had those conversations where it brings up some emotion as we start to say it, and then we're like, damn, now I'm going to cry and all of that. Normal thoughts for all of us. So if you're a person who is particularly prone to that avoidance strategy, you can start by writing it down to soften the opening of the conversation and then take some time to regulate together and then talk about it further and start to get into the depth of it so you feel a little bit safer. And then the third one, this is really common, is prioritizing work over connection. And the reason that it's work over connection is one of the really common ones is because there's other things you can do, of course. You can, go out with your mates too much. You can spend too much time, with your footy team or whatever else you do, going down to the pub or, hanging out with other people. There's all of those things, but work is kind of that one that your partner can't argue with, right? Because if you're out with your mates all the time, it's easy for them to say, hey, why aren't you at home with me? You're out having fun instead and avoiding me. But it's really hard when it's like, hey, I'm working really hard for us. I'm trying to earn more money so we can have a better life and buy a house and buy a car and go on holidays and blah, blah, blah. Like that's a really hard one to argue with. So if you're an avoidant, that's like the perfect strategy because what are they going to say? I don't want you to earn as much money. There's a bit of push and shove in that one because the cost of living, mortgages, bills, all of that stuff. So this is one that you really need to start to reflect on, and that's one of the key things. But there is a feeling of feeling worthy when you throw yourself into work. It's like you want to be as successful at work as you possibly can because you need a feeling of feeling worthy. You're also looking for autonomy, so to be your own person and sort of make your own way in life as well as be in a relationship. And they're also looking to control the level of depth and connection with their partner again, because a lot of this comes down to control of that vulnerability and intimacy in relationships. Now, when you're overworking and spending too much time at work and not enough time at home and not enough time with your partner, this can really cause distance. It can cause your partner to feel rejected and it can start to build up resentment because it's like, oh, they'd rather be doing anything than spend time with me. You can see how that would happen, right? Now, first of all, reflection is one of the most important things. So you have to become aware that you are doing this because I've been in some really serious roles where there's lots and lots of hours required. And what that means is I needed to schedule time together or I needed to say, so let's not do anything on a Sunday so we can just be at home by ourselves. We can just hang out. We can just do our own thing. At one point I was working like 60 hours a week and I was studying at TAFE 3 nights a week as well because I was trying to transition out of that job that was just so full on for so many years and find a bit more peace. And hey, I landed here, so that's great. But I've been in that state and I wasn't avoiding. I was just in a really, really senior role where I had to work so many hours to get the work done. So what we did is we scheduled a lot of time together. So there was a Sunday where we never made plans. Saturday, we might hang out with other people together, but Friday night we might do the same, but Sunday was always our day. So if you're an avoidant person and you know that you're doing that, you can start to schedule more time together to make sure your partner has their needs met, they feel connected to you, they feel seen, they feel heard, and you're building that relationship with them together. And that can be a date night, that can be time on a Sunday, that can be holidays, that can be reducing your hours, that can be a phone call during the day, that can be whatever you need to do. And another great example, I remember very early on in my career, we're only in our 20s then, I actually got a job where I was on afternoon shift. And what my wife started to do is she would cook dinner and drive down to where I worked and sit in my office with me for an hour and just have dinner together. So we could still have dinner together, at least once a week. Because I was Monday to Friday, I was working, 2:30 till 11 and she was on day shift. And that was one of the things that we chose to do to get my career ahead so that we could, have better things and buy a house and all that stuff when we were young. So there's always ways that you can schedule these things in. You can get creative with it. But the important thing is to make sure that you do that because it is super important to make sure you're spending enough time together and you're building your relationship and that your partner doesn't come off second best all the time. So there we go. There's the top 3 traits of avoidant people. Again, I've already done the anxious. If you haven't got that, let me know or just make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel that you're watching this on right now. And you can just jump straight in and watch it and all the other content that comes out around this. So much love, people, and I'll see you next time.